Perfect. Thank you, Bruce, for that. So I'm Brandon Rose. I'm a long-time CARB staff members. I actually got my start at the California Energy Commission in Renewable Energy Office before moving over to CARB and doing the truck and bus and the diesel roles for many years. And so I found myself in this interesting situation where transportation is electrifying, and all of a sudden my utility background is very useful to go with my knowledge of transportation. So it really is, for me, it's been exciting times to watch new technology coming in and starting to revolutionize transportation. And we've seen today, and we had the first panel today was talking about some of the fleet needs. And then we moved more into the infrastructure, and we had some really good fleet operators who are running the trucks and some of the guys who are selling the trucks. So this third session is, we've designed it to be an overview sort of the utility perspective and a little bit about permitting. And I know all of these areas do overlap, but I think, as the utility really is both your fuel provider, if you're doing battery electric zero emission vehicles, right, and potentially a big source of incentives as well. So they're one of the most important players in any successful project. And so today's format, we're going to have, we'll do a quick intro of our three panelists. Ramiro is going to take us through the utility sort of perspective presentation. And then I have a few questions prepared. I have some from the audience registration questions, and we'll sort of see where the discussion leads us. And I'll definitely keep an eye on what everybody submits to us and try to pull those and get those as much as possible. We have until about 3 o'clock today. So with that, let's do just a quick run through, just to sort of introduce yourself and just a very brief background about your organization and what it does. Let's start with Ramiro, and then Zach, and then Vivju.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Brandon, for that introduction. My name is Ramiro Lepe. I am the Senior Advisor on Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transfer Program. And just as timing up, my gardener just got here. So if you hear some humming in the background, hopefully it will leave pretty soon here. But a little bit about myself. I help fleets are at the beginning stages of electrification through all things Southern California Edison programs. Definitely going to do a deep dive today into our Charge Ready Transfer Program, our grant writing assistance, EV Ready to Study, and tons of other bells and whistles that we do offer to our program participants. So thank you guys so much. It absolutely means everything to me that you guys are spending your Wednesday afternoon on this call, listening to us present about all things infrastructure, and definitely looking forward to connecting with you guys and see how we can help you guys out in this process.
All right. Thanks, Ramiro. And hi, everyone. I'm Zach Thompson with East Bay Community Energy. I am on our transportation electrification programs team here. So East Bay Community Energy, EBCE, who we are, some of you may be familiar with the term Community Choice Aggregator, or CCA. So that's what we are in EBCE up here in Alameda County in the Bay Area. But if you're not familiar with that term, basically we're a local community choice power supplier. So we provide the electricity to Alameda County, as well as the city of Tracy out in San Joaquin County, and soon to be the city of Stockton as well. And so really our mission is providing cleaner electricity at lower rates to those communities. And then we are a public agency, so we're governed by a board of directors that's made up of elected officials from each of the different jurisdictions that we serve. And then as a public agency, we're not for profit, so we reinvest those earnings from the sale of electricity back into community benefit programs. So that's the team that I'm on, and specifically focused on transportation electrification programs. So happy to talk more about that and go into more detail about kind of EBCE's role in all of this and our relationship to investor-owned utilities and with our municipalities and different jurisdictions that we serve. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Zach. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vibhu Kaushik. I'm the Global Head of Utilities at Prologis. Prologis is world's leading logistics real estate company with over 1.2 billion square feet of warehouses in 20 countries globally. US is one of our biggest market with over 600 million square feet of commercial real estate and almost 4,000 plus warehouse buildings. I lead our global utilities business, which includes deployment of our solar, storage, and mobility solutions at our building. Supporting that, partnering with electric utilities and our customers. I do have about 17 years of electric utilities experience in both California and Canada, prior with Southern California Edison. And we partner closely with both EVC on our solar offering and mobility programs, as well as SCE on several projects in the service territory. So glad to be here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for everyone. Ramiro, do you want to go ahead and jump into your presentation?
Absolutely, guys. Thank you guys once again for having me. Yeah, so let me jump into all things charge-ready transport. So this is our low to no cost EV infrastructure installation program. But before I go there, I want to just definitely share with you a little bit about myself, who I am, where I come from. I think this might be important for some of you guys. So I actually happen to come from a transportation background. I am a product of transportation. My father owned a transportation company for many, many years that he still has. And he put me through college through driving a truck and, of course, operating his business. And I have done everything in the transportation field, from selling forklifts, warehousing, ran a rental operation for a large entity here in Southern California for many, many years. I've sold cranes. I represented a rental branch for a large equipment manufacturer. So in other words, I say that to you because I understand the transition that you're going through. I mean, my dad and I have very interesting conversations at the dinner table and go over all things, emissions and where the industry's heading into. So I think it's important for you guys to know a little bit about my background as to where you guys are going forward, because I definitely do want to provide myself as a resource as we are moving along in this electrification journey that we're kind of embarking in. Now, as far as charge-ready transfer program or just electrification in general, so regardless of what service area you are in, so this is non-Edison specific on this slide, I want to provide you guys with a couple key points, right? These are kind of like my 5 steps to achieving a utility fleet engagement, high electrification future, if you will. And these are just 5 tidbits that I kind of identified as to important elements that every fleet operator or everybody who's directly affected or going into transitioning to electric or any other kind of technology for that matter is EV adoption, right? So as you're looking at your EV adoption, you want to look at the key players in the industry, people who have already adopted, and you want to follow what they're doing, right? You want to see what fail-safes that they've done in their organization, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. And ultimately, you want to start, kind of fix, setting up your infrastructure and deployment plans around successes of other people in the industry. I always tell people you want to start off with a small, test fleet. And then eventually, once you get that right product, right, you get that right framework, then you can start scaling. The next one would be actually determining the appropriate vehicles for your particular application, right? Regardless of which technology, we go into, or you go into, should I say. So I know Tessie mentioned about the decision tree, right? So which technology you're going to choose for your particular fleet. It's important to look at what's important for your particular scenario and always plan for the worst, right? That's what you want to do. So EV itself, the battery size, the charging patterns, these are all things that do play a factor into decision-making up front that will save you tons of headaches down the line. The other one, of course, the big one is right-sizing and future-proofing your infrastructure. So what exactly does that mean, right? So are you going from a single shift application to a double shift application? Maybe you're trying to get some ROI a little bit faster, or trying to compare that to the diesel, your regular acquisition plan, or are you going to add more shifts? What does all that look like, right? So it's not just about the initial deployment that you're doing between like years 1 and 2. You want to look down the line, right? Like up to a 10-year deployment strategy and start planning accordingly. The other one, of course, is contacting your local utility company and establishing rates. So I get customers I talk to sometimes, they're like, well, our building has enough load. We want to just hook up these yard goats, to our building load, right? Or a day cab or whatever they're doing. And yes, technically you might be able to do that in some scenarios, right? But what is that going to do to your electric bill? I can tell you some of the programs that we offer, it's got very special commercial time of use rates and demand charge holidays that are designed specifically for EV initiatives, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you reach out to your local utility company, establish your actual rates structures for your EV initiatives up front. That way you don't get a bill and then get unpleasantly surprised. The other one, of course, probably one of the most important things we'll talk about today is going to be timing. So you'll hear utilities, and we're famous for saying, engage with us often, engage with us early. But what exactly does that mean, right? I can tell you from date of application to most utility-led programs, the time that the infrastructure is physically in the ground, you are looking at about a year to year and a half timeline. So please use that, when you are fleet planning, right? You don't want to run into a scenario where, you get your truck, then your charging station, and then your infrastructure still a couple months out, right? That's not the ideal scenario. It definitely needs to be the other way around. Now, there's a lot of things that can happen, right? Where I've seen that go faster, and in some scenarios, I've seen it go a lot slower, which we'll definitely jump into here in a second. Now, if you happen to be an SCE service area, so let me actually go over to this slide here. We do have a program that helps fleets offset the cost of transitioning to electric by the name of Charge Ready Transport. Kind of give you guys a little history about the program. So Charge Ready Transport is a program that launched back in 2019. What the California Public Utilities Commission did is they granted us a budget of just over $342 million. And the entire goal of this particular program is to electrify a total of 870 sites for a total of 8,490 electric vehicles. So yes, we certainly have our work cut out for us. Now, the program, it's actually split off into 4 major categories. And the one that we're mostly known for, mind you, I'm going to go into massive detail here in a second, is that we do provide a low to no cost EV infrastructure solution for our customers. Now, we actually give a customer 2 different tracks. On both sides of those tracks, we do all the utility side upgrades. And then we give a customer an SCE build option where we go all the way out to the first point of interconnection on their facility. And then we have another one that supports distributed energy resources, such as solar, energy storage, combination of both, or any kind of advanced bells and whistles on the infrastructure. And that particular track has an up to 80% project cost rebate that is associated with it, which once again, I will go over in massive detail here in a second. There is also charger hardware rebates of up to 50%. So you could potentially receive between $1,700 up to $37,000 per physical charger that you buy, which we'll also cover. And then there's commercial time of use rates designed specifically for your EV initiative. So during this program, you will get a brand new meter with special rates and advanced charge holidays, which once again, I will cover here in a second. And as a la carte services, as I like to call them, we do have our EV advisory services. So these would be programs like our EV readiness study, as well as grant writing assistance. And now, guys, I know I'm talking super fast. I got about 10 minutes to cover a total of 4 different programs that we offer. So please bear with me. All right, guys. Now, as far as the question I always get is, what kind of vehicles are supported through Charge Ready Transport? And to give you an idea, it's any type of on-road vehicle that is a Class 2 through a Class 8 that's 100% electric. So think, F-line all the way up to a tandem axle day cab and everything in between. On the off-road side of it, we do support yard trucks, so any kind of yard goat, forklift, TRU infrastructure. So if you're looking at adding some shore power, this program might be for you. Airport grass support equipment, or anything really that's off-road that is 100% electric. Now, one of the really cool things about this program is that we can actually look at your 10-year deployment strategy as part of the program. So let's say, for example, if you have a fleet and you're looking at deploying, let's just call it 100 day cabs between here the next 10 years, at 10 a pop for every year you're doing 10. We can technically, through Charge Ready Transport, deploy the entire infrastructure for all 100 EVs up front, as long as the customer purchases and installs the chargers up front as part of the process and puts those particular vehicles onto the program participation agreement. Now, I know it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to buy a charger 10 years in advance, but the great thing is you can customize that number, right? So you can say, well, 10 years doesn't make sense, but we're comfortable doing a 3-year strategy, 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, whatever that might be. And then that's going to alleviate you from having to be in a perpetual construction project, if you will. Now, if you're in a test phase at the moment, you could always apply to Charge Ready Transport for the vehicles that you know you are receiving, and then you could turn around and apply for the program down the line in the future, for the same site facility as many times as you need to. So we do give you that particular flexibility. All right, guys. So as far as the types of chargers that we do support through this program, it's anything that's an AC level 2 all the way up to a 350 kilowatt DC power cabinet, everything in between. We do have an approved product list, which is at sce.com/APL. And you will see a myriad of chargers that are on this product list that you would be able to choose from. Any charger entering our program does have to be UL listed and NRTL certified. So that is a requirement. And then there would be a separate option for any kind of off-road, TRU, or forklift chargers that are also on that APL. All right, guys. Now, as far as rebates are concerned, so let's talk about some of the fun stuff here. So there are charger hardware rebates that are available as part of this program. And there's 3 different ways of how a customer could actually qualify for these rebates. First one being, if you're a transit agency, a school district, or if your project site is in a disadvantaged community by way of air quality, and the organization or parent company thereof is not on the Fortune 1000 list. If you fall to any of those categories, you would automatically qualify between 1,700 all the way up to 37,000 per physical charger. And it is based on the power band itself. Now, there are questions that always come up here, and a lot of those questions are always about is stacking, right? Can you utilize charge ready transport with other programs like, the Energize Core program? It's going to be the CalSTAR Energize program, or maybe, you're doing an HVAP program. And the short answer to that is yes, we do allow customers to utilize charge ready transport with an outside agency, as long as they're okay with you utilizing charge ready transport. And one thing, if there are any charger rebates that you are receiving, you just cannot exceed 100% of the cost of the chargers between all the programs that you're applying for. All right, guys. So now let's get into the actual physical infrastructure piece of it. So we're going to give a customer two different infrastructure installation tracks. The first one is the SCE built infrastructure option. So under this scenario, we're going to cover everything here that you see here in green. So that would include upgrading or replacing a transformer if necessary, running service to a brand new meter with special EV rates, which we'll go over here in a second. And this is a property line, right? So this is the line of delineation between, the infrastructure and the customer's facility. So we would actually go onto the customer's facility, install the paneling, run all the trenching, all the wiring, all the conduit, all the way out to the first point of interconnection between the physical charger and the actual physical infrastructure. So under this scenario, the customer is only responsible for purchasing the electric vehicle, the charger, installing the charger. We take care of everything else. That includes getting the design, a design situation taken care of, permitting. It includes all the materials, all the human resource capital, all the different elements that are necessary to complete this construction project. Now, your secondary option would be what we call the customer built infrastructure option. So in this scenario, we still cover everything in green, with the difference that everything in gold on the customer side is responsibility of the customer. And this would be an install that would have to be done with IEBW union labor. If a customer embarks on this particular scenario, they would be eligible to get up to 80% rebate of the project costs. Now, a lot of people at this point will ask me, well, why would we do the customer build versus the SCE build? And the short answer to that is, if you ever plan on adding solar or any kind of distributed energy resources to your project, you would have to do that under the customer built infrastructure. Or if a customer wants to add some advanced bells and whistles, to the infrastructure itself, that's when somebody would actually choose this particular option. The up to 80% project cost rebate is associated with what we would have paid for had we done the work under the SCE built infrastructure. One thing I would disclose up front to you guys is that there are easements that are part of this process. So if this is a program that you wish to embark on and want more information on, of course, we could definitely have a sidebar conversation. I can explain to you all the intricacies of the actual easements and how that applies to your particular scenario. All right, guys, so moving along here. So one of the questions I always get is asked is, well, how much power is available in my particular facility, right? And as you are looking at electrification, going in that particular direction, it's important, right? You guys definitely have to know that. We do have a public facing tool, which we call the Dr. Pep tool. And on here, you're able to, on the spot, get an estimate of the grid's needs assessment for your particular facility. This will give you information for the estimated reserve load circuit capacity and reserve load substation capacity for the year prior, the current year, and a 3-year projection. Once again, it is an estimate, and it's just built just to really give you an idea as to what is available in your particular facility. So if you are looking at a development or you have multi-sites and you want to see what the actual capacity looks like in your area, I could give you guys a quick tutorial offline and show you exactly how to utilize this tool. And it is public access for those of you that are wondering. All right, guys, so we did talk about a new EV rate with a special meter designed specifically for your EV initiative. So anyone entering the Charge Ready Transport program automatically gets entered into what we call commercial time of use rates 7, 8, and 9. So you get a special bill just specifically for your EV charging. Currently, there are no demand charges through 2023. And then there's a 5-year phase-in period from 2024 through 2029. So if you were charging your fleet today, the best time of the day to charge your truck would be between the hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The worst time year-round to charge your vehicle is between the hours of 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then the secondary best time to charge today would be between the hours of 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. And I can tell you from a rate structure, if you were to charge, for example, your vehicle between 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. versus 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., it's literally just over 3 times more. So here I get a lot of questions asking, well, our guys come in at, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. How are we going to avoid this, 4 to 9 p.m. charging time? This is when managed charging kicks in. And we highly, highly, highly recommend you talking to your charging manufacturer about those particular options. So it is something that after a driver comes in, they do their post-trip inspection, they plug in the vehicle. You can literally set it almost like if you were using like a Geotab or Samsara. You can set on your phone where it actually starts charging at 9:01 as an example. So that's something where you could utilize load management as part of the process as well to avoid the higher time of use rates that are between the hours of 4 and 9 p.m. If you are curious as to your estimated cost of electricity versus diesel, we do have a free tool that you can log into now. It's fleetfuelcalculator.sce.com. And in that tool, you're going to be able to enter all your fleet information, right? What classic class, how many days you're operating, miles, what time of the day you're charging, what kind of charger you have. And it'll actually give you a fully customized report as to your estimated usage and also the cost of diesel versus electricity under different scenarios. So that is something you could utilize today. All right, guys. So we do also have, these are, I call them the a la carte services. You have a transportation electrification advisory services. So part of what we do is not just the infrastructure, right? We really want to support a fleet at any given point in their electrification journey. And the way that we do that, the first program that we offer is what we call the EV Readiness Study Program. This would be a high-level overview of your fleet, your location, and it answers questions such as what is the cost of electricity versus diesel, right? You see these graphs here on the right. That's kind of what your report looks like. It'll answer the questions as far as what kind of electric vehicles are in the marketplace, what kind of charging stations are available in the marketplace, what kind of grant programs are out there. And then what we do is we spend about a good hour, it'd be your fleet, wherever your operators are, and one of our DER specialists. And at that point, they'll really give you a framework of infrastructure installation success. This is a free service. It's about a 3 to 4 week lead time, and we could definitely get you signed up for that at any given point. The other one would be grant writing assistance. So here, what we did is we actually partnered up with a third party by the name of Gladstein, Neandros and Associates, also known as GNA. And what we do is we actually pay for GNA. We pay GNA to write grants on behalf of our customers. So the customer would have two different options. It would either be a fully written grant done by GNA for the customer, or it'll be a grant package review. So currently we are writing for the Volkswagen mitigation program as well as Carl Moyer. So if you kind of see how our structure is, our EV Readiness Study Program is centered to be at that beginning stages of electrification. Someone who's just thinking about it, he just wants to get the feasibility of it. Then once the customer progresses, says, yes, we want to go electric, it all sounds great, but how we're going to pay for everything, that's when it kicks into grant writing assistance. And then, of course, you have the infrastructure installation program, which is charge ready transport for somebody that is committed and has vehicles coming in to their particular fleets. Now, there are very specific terms and conditions for our program. The majority of them are listed here. And if you read here, it says that within 45 days of signing the program participation agreement, you would have to submit the POs for the vehicles and the charging equipment. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that you have to have a PO up front in order to be able to enter charge ready transport. When in reality, we don't ask you for the POs until usually about 4 to 6 months after you apply to the program. Now, in full disclosure, our time frame, just to kind of give you an idea, it is between a year to year and a half from the day that you apply to charge ready transport to the time that the physical infrastructure is deployed at your particular facility. So the sweet spot really is if you are receiving electric vehicles within 2 years, that'll be the time where you want to apply to programs such as charge ready transport. Now, there is a property easement that is required. And in something like that, I can tell you there are no red line revisions allowed on the easement or the program participation agreement, but we do disclose the information up front. Now, mind you, we are putting physical infrastructure into your facility. So we have to be able to access and repair and maintain the infrastructure in perpetuity. And that is the reason for that particular easement. The other point here is that vehicles have to be deployed within 18 months of signing the program participation agreement. Now, we understand there's lots of lead time issues right now. We're experiencing a lot, even in our transformers and some of our switchgear equipment. So we will work with you in good faith on this particular provision. Now, for any kind of on-road vehicles, there has to be an EV charging network service provider that sends data back to SCE for 5 years. And it's something where you literally, at time of installation, you set it up once, it does it automatically, and then you'll be in compliance with our program. Now, I think one of the biggest things here is that there is a 10-year program participation agreement as part of charge ready transport. So the way it reads is the chargers have to be maintained, the chargers have to be installed and operational for a minimum of 10 years. Now, with that, there is no minimum usage requirement. So we're not going to say, oh, you have to use X amount of kilowatts a month or a day or anything of that nature, but they do have to be installed for that time frame. And if you are committing to that future vehicle acquisition plan, we actually do hold the customers to that, right? So let's say if you're in that scenario where you're buying 100 day cabs, if at the end of 10 years you only end up purchasing 90, then you could be potentially on the hook for a clawback for any unused infrastructure, is the way that that would work out. All right, guys, so this is our process flow. And a lot of people ask me, well, why does it take a year to year and a half for the infrastructure to get deployed? And I can tell you there's so many different pitfalls that I see and that I want to kind of disclose to you guys right now. So let's say, for example, if you have a fleet, you're receiving vehicles within 2 years, you want to apply for the program, all that we would need to get your process started would be to know the site location, ensure it's in our service area, know what kind of electric vehicles you're buying, when the estimated arrival date, making sure that's within 2 years, and then having that charging information up front. Now, most of the scenarios that I run into, most times customers don't have the charger information up front. You can still technically apply to the program without the charger information, but you will literally get stuck in section 3 right here. So in this scenario, that's when we do what we call a project feasibility study. An entire goal of that is to actually get your site or fleet ready for the actual on-site project site evaluation that ends up delivering a conceptual infrastructure design plan. That's when we will go out to your facility, ask you tons of questions about throughput, safety, where the current infrastructure is at, where the proposed new infrastructure will go into, and really try to come up with the actual design plan that is right for your business, but also keeps the cost as low as possible for the utility side. If all parties are in agreement after that particular design plan is delivered, then we go into the actual agreement. So up until step number 6, the customer or SC, we could back out. There's no financial implications to the customer at that point. If indeed you do go to the program participation agreement, you sign the agreement, then at that point, if you back out afterwards, you might be liable for a clawback, for example, for sections 4 and 5 that you hear, which is the on-site evaluation and the actual design plan. It is at that point, once you sign the agreement, that we ask you for the purchase orders for the EV and the charging equipment. If you are going to be eligible for any kind of rebates, you would do your rebate assignment at that point as well. Now, one thing that I see is that usually customers will go all the way through to agreement, and then they change the charger for the new one, the 2.0 version with bells and whistles, the new stickers, I don't know, what have you. And then that will literally set your project back in time. So it's important that once you do choose a charger, do everything you possibly can to make sure you stick to it. If not, that can literally set back your project back by several weeks. The other one that I've seen as well is where we get to step number 7, 8, and 9, and the customer still hasn't submitted a PO, and then there might be a 2-week, 2-month, 3-month, 4-month lead time until we actually see that. So your project will not progress until we actually have all that documentation in hand. After that, we actually go into your design and build phase, and then this is your track. So this would be your SC build infrastructure track, your customer build make ready track. What I see the problem here the most is easements. Sometimes customers, even though we disclose information up front, we send the easements to the customer to send to legal. Sometimes they never get to legal, or maybe there's a change in management or something that happens. And then at that point, they might get caught up here for a while they're going through a legal review process. So from there, then we go into issuing rebates, and notice that your construction is complete. And then there's about a 30 to 45 day window, or hold time, if you will, between the time that the construction is complete and the time that you actually see your rebate. So that's something that you guys should know upfront as well. From there, we kick into a 10-year verification process. So once again, it's a 10-year program agreement as part of this program. And periodically, we will check on the infrastructure to make sure that it's installed and operational. And then, of course, checking in for POs and delivery of vehicles if you are doing any kind of an infrastructure, any kind of vehicle acquisition plan over the initial deployment date. All right, guys, so I know that was tons of information all in a short period of time, but this is my contact information here. If you guys happen to have your cell phones on you, pop up your camera, scan that link icon. You will be able to save my contact information right on your phone. Everything I talked to you about now, including a short presentation of this very same program, is on that link page. And of course, any way I could ever assist you guys in your electrification initiatives, feel free to reach out to me at any given time.
Perfect. Thank you, Ramiro. So one of the things I do want to point out that and maybe you can comment, Ramiro, a little bit, is your presentation is specific to Southern California Edison and customers in that jurisdiction, but there are other programs in each utility, and if you're in PG&E or San Diego Gas and Electric, it will mirror your program to a very similar degree. Is that correct?
That is correct. PG&E, SCG&E have similar programs, and if you guys need me to make any formal introductions with the program management team and either of those two teams, reach out to me and I'll certainly make that introduction immediately for you guys.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump over to Zach. I think you have a few words. Tell us a little bit about what offerings your organization has.
Sure, yeah. So, Southern California Edison, PG&E, they're the investor-owned utilities. PG&E is the utility here in our service area. So we at EBCE kind of operate in conjunction with them in a way. So EBCE is responsible for the generation of the electricity, and PG&E is responsible for the transmission and distribution of that electricity. So we kind of have a unique relationship with the utility. And then again, being a joint power authority, a public agency, we have a unique relationship with the different municipalities and jurisdictions that we serve. And again, as I mentioned earlier, being a public agency, the revenue that we make from the generation of electricity and the sale of that electricity gets passed back into the community through local programs. And so, one of those programs too is a medium and heavy duty fleet technical assistance program. So Ramiro has something similar to that with SCE. We at EBCE are offering that as well at no cost to our fleets as well. So if you are interested in receiving any of that kind of assistance, feel free to reach out to me directly. But that program, we have a consultant team on board who comes in and conducts a full assessment of your full fleet inventory, looks at your kind of vehicle procurement and replacement cycles, the daily use case of your vehicles and operations of those vehicles, and then establishes basically a 10-year plan of how you would replace those vehicles with electric options as the technology readiness becomes available. And then they also will assess your domicile location or locations, if you have multiple, for the deployment of charging infrastructure. And so they'll look at things like, how are the vehicles domiciled at your facility? What makes sense in a way of laying out charging infrastructure at that facility to support those vehicles? They'll look into things like, for PG&E up here, it's the ICA map that's similar to what Ramiro showed earlier, that it kind of indicates, the level of capacity that's available on the lines serving your facility. So they'll look at that as well to kind of determine, will PG&E need to make, any significant upgrades on the transmission lines there in order to serve the charging stations that are, recommended at the site. And then, they'll also run like a total cost of ownership analysis over a 10-year period and a greenhouse gas reduction analysis for that as well. Again, it basically the result in that is a plan that lays out how you'll that's kind of schedule for transitioning your internal combustion engine vehicles out for electric vehicles, installing the charging infrastructure, and then operating those vehicles and charging infrastructure over a 10-year period as well, and compare the two between kind of business as usual of operating internal combustion engine versus the 10-year costs of operating electric vehicles as well. So again, that's a no-cost technical assistance program that EBCE is offering to our fleets. So if you have interest in that program, of course, feel free to reach out. There's a little bit of data collection that typically needs to happen at the beginning of that. So if you have any data collection systems in place for your fleets, that always kind of gives us a head start in doing that. But if you don't have that, then we can work around that as well. And the team will make some assumptions and run those by you. It'll be a really collaborative process. And then additionally to that, EBCE, we were awarded the California Energy Commission grant to develop a medium heavy duty goods movement electrification blueprint for our service area. And so we're in the process of doing that now. And basically the result of that will be a blueprint plan that has high level strategies and then specific actions within each of those strategic areas, or and it'll be actions focused on vehicles, infrastructure, financing, workforce development, and community benefit. So that's something that we will be wrapping up in the 2023 calendar year. So and we have a stakeholder engagement process that we're starting to put together for that as well. So, looking for any kind of engagement that we can get with our, local fleets operating in our service area, independent owner operators. We want to hear from everyone. So that's what we at EBCE have been up to.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to try a little bit later. We'll do hopefully a little bit of Q&A on grid and reliability and some of those really common questions that we hear from stakeholders. But first, I want to jump over to Vipul and Prologis. I was watching CNBC at lunchtime a few weeks ago, and Prologis' CEO was on talking about their commitment to this electrification space. And so, as you heard, they own millions of square feet of warehouses. They are committed to success of vehicle electrification. So I'm very excited and happy to have them here today. So go ahead.
Thank you, Brandon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about Prologis' commitment to sustainability and clean energy, as well as providing clean transportation, charging, EV infrastructure for our customers at our buildings. I'll start with this slide with some trivia numbers here, which are actually outdated. There was an Oxford economics research report today that upped this number from 3.5% to 4%. So estimating about 4% of global GDP in the 19 countries where Prologis does business flows through our buildings. That's significantly higher than previously. $2.2 trillion of value of goods. Currently, we have about 6,000 buildings in these 19 countries across North America, Central and South America, 12 countries in Europe, as well as China, Japan, and Singapore. And Prologis is also entering India starting January, so that'll be the 20th country. Logistics is what we do, and serving logistics customers is the part of the core business. So let's go to I'll try flipping the slides here. There we go. Thank you. So in terms of global footprint, Prologis is publicly listed on New York Stock Exchange. Numbers move every day. We have been in S&P 100 for the past several years. I think as of this month, we are in S&P 50. So in terms of business, it's all across these continents and covering over 200 billion of assets under management. So the other stats that we're more proud of is rated as the most sustainable real estate investment trust with our energy and sustainability practice, and serving a lot of these customers. Some of the logos, the big ones, as you see here, 5,800 customers globally, including Amazon as one of our biggest customers, FedEx, DHL, Walmart, Home Depot, UPS, others. So that's in terms of scale. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So we work closely with utilities, and I talked about my role, which is really partnership with utilities and customers to accelerate deployment of our clean energy and electrification solutions. I want to orient the discussion on what does that look like and how big of an impact it can have. So if you think of a current logistics warehouse, typical electricity consumption is about 4 to 6 kilowatt hours per square foot per year. That's what you see in these buildings. Boxes come in and boxes go out. They come in from shipping ports, they are stored or they're transported across the country, and they go out in trucks or medium-sized delivery vans for last mile delivery to customers. The load is typically flat, and it's about 4 to 6 kilowatt hour per square foot per year. Now, as we think of electrification and electrifying all the transport vehicles, whether it's heavy-duty trucks, medium-duty vans that come in and out of these warehouses, that load will go from that 4 to 6 to almost 30 kilowatt hour per square feet per year. So that's a 7 times increase in energy consumption at each one of our buildings. If we were to think of electrifying even just 30% of our portfolio, I think our goal is to do much higher, but even with that 30%, then that total energy consumption becomes 2.5 times. So when we map our footprint of Prologis buildings across the US to some of the bigger utilities, we see there's a huge overlap in the footprint and how much energy we consume today and how that will scale up as we think of future with electrification. So point is partnership with utilities, access to energy, and hopefully deploying some of that on-site to have as much local clean energy as possible is part of the solution here. Moving to the next slide. So, sorry. This map shows quickly, so SCE is on the line, East Bay Community Energy is on the line. They are part of 11 utilities we work with in California with our 809 large buildings, slash warehouses. We are spread in 22 states across the US, and we partner with over 47 different electric utilities across our footprint on both power access, clean energy, and transportation solutions. The largest market is California for us, followed by Texas, Illinois, and Florida. So with that, I want to share with you what does that relationship look like from Prologis with the electric utilities. So there are really two sides to that relationship. One is of being a large customer to the utilities we work with. That includes getting power access to serve our on-site customers in our warehouses. Also, as we electrify, that load goes up 7 to 8 times. So getting that much more power at these buildings. Many of our customers are Silicon Valley hyperscalers who are interested in data centers. And data centers, the energy is over 100 times. So having that key customer account established with utilities, having that strategic relationship with the C-suites and working teams on both mobility side and clean energy side, power access, interconnections is really important for this business. We are also a clean energy provider to some of the utilities. So buildings where we can generate excess clean energy, we want to be a partner in that electric sector decarbonization journey, and also providing resiliency to the grid with the distributed energy resources that could be deployed at our buildings. So it's a two-fold relationship. Lastly, I'll just show one slide here that shows a successful project and a partnership with Southern California Edison and Commerce, California, where this is now up and running, operational with the electric trucks, Class 8 electric trucks and chargers that are up and running every day. So this was a great partnership with the SCE Charge Ready Transport Program as Romero presented the program. We were able to work with the utility and really simplify the product for our on-site customer who was in the building. So they didn't have to go through a lot of the technicalities and economic risks, since they are going to be in the building for about 3 to 5 years. Average lease in these buildings is about 3 to 5 years. It makes sense for the owner of the buildings to invest in this infrastructure that's going to last for a couple decades or longer. So it's really simplifying with no upfront costs, co-terminus with their lease, and a simple dollar per kilowatt hour service model. Work for them, work for us, and it worked with for SCE in this partnership under the Charge Ready Transport. We have done a similar project at a non-Prologis building at Santa Fe Springs in California, which also went live and is up and running and operational. So I guess my last takeaway message here is definitely partner with the utilities and wherever you are in the footprint, work with them early, understanding how to get all this infrastructure deployed. But also you can call Prologis, and since we partner with all the utilities across our footprint, we'll be happy to deploy some of the EV charging infrastructure, even if it is not our building. So with that, Brandon, I think the last slide has my contact info. Feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to connect you with our technical teams on the mobility side who partner with the utilities and understand the process in every detail, or the commercial teams as well. Thank you. Back to you, Brandon.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Let me go ahead and start off with a question, since we're talking about that building space, and we hear this pretty consistently. We did, CARB did a series of infrastructure workshops late last year and earlier this year. And one of those is, what if a fleet doesn't own their property or they're leasing the property? What is that process? Can they still go, with zero emission technology? What's that sort of way to get permission? So from Prologis, I guess, perspective, would you have a customer like contact you? What would that process be for someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of our buildings, we do not own the fleet. We own the building. We have leased it to an e-commerce customer like Amazon or FedEx, who actually has the delivery vehicles and owns the operations and in that building for a finite number of years. So this is where I think simplifying that partnership, working with the electric utility, in this case SCE, where we can partner and Prologis could be one strong partner versus working with several different customers in different buildings. That simplifies it for SCE or PG&E, same story there for different projects, or ComEd in New York or ComEd in Chicago. And then from a customer perspective, it's really reduces that commitment, even if they need that access for, I think Romero shared the 10-year commitment. Even if they are in the building for 3 to 5 years, they don't have to provide that long-term commitment, and they can just have Prologis do all the work and upfront cost to do it on the customer side hardware. The utility partnerships comes in on the utility interconnection side of it, and together we can simplify and deliver that solution.
Ramiro, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. So I think like from our angle is, if a customer is leasing a facility, it is something where I have been on multiple calls with different landowners, and they all have different questions, for example, than what a fleet might have. So it is something that is doable, right? Now, the easement piece of it, when I know I mentioned that earlier and I always allude to it, is something that's a vital key of it, right? So we cannot proceed with the project unless the landlord or property owner is in agreement and they sign off on the easement. So sometimes it just takes a conversation, right? So us as Edison, like I'll hop on a call with a landlord and the customer, we discuss, we go over all their concerns, we explain the program, and usually like 90% of the time, they're in agreement and everything moves forward. Now, there have been scenarios where customers, landowners in this scenario, they just simply don't want that easement and they don't want to move forward, right? So that does prohibit us from being able to use charge-ready transport, but we at least provide the service to be able to talk to, a landowner if necessary. We do quite often. And one thing I can tell you,
how common is that? I mean, is that a big barrier, or are you seeing people overcome that?
Now, I will say a good 90% of the chances is that we could overcome it, right, with a good conversation. Sometimes the customers, they come to us, say, oh, we talked to the landowner, they're ecstatic about it. It's perceived as, increasing value to the property as an example. Other times, some are skeptical, want to learn more about it. Now, the way that the program is written, right, it is something where, let's say, for example, customer XYZ is leasing and they go into charge-ready transport and they leave in 5 years. So at that scenario, even though there's a 10-year program participation agreement, it can get transferred, charge-ready transport. The actual agreement could get transferred to the next lessee coming in or to the property owner, him or herself. So that is a possibility, right? So that transferability. In the event, for example, where a property owner says, no, we want to tear the place down and we're going to build a park, I don't know, what have you. In that kind of adverse scenario, the customer of record could potentially be on the hook for a clawback. So it doesn't actually follow the landowner, the actual, the liability, if you will, would actually fall on the property, on the program participant. Is the way that would work in that scenario.
Let me ask this related to buildings before we move on a little bit, is are there sort of, I don't know if, say, a fleet, a fleet manager or an owner operator understands all that terminology. You have wires coming in, you have a meter, and then you have sort of their building side, but they pay attention to. Are there any sort of specific typical upgrades that people need to be aware of that might be on the utility side or on their own site side? I'll sort of just put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, it's very project specific, right? No two projects are ever the same. And that's one thing that I've learned being here at the utility. So it's a very complex project, right? You have some scenarios where there's plenty of power in the area, makes it a little bit easier. There's some scenarios where we have to do, substation upgrades potentially, right? Or just massive upgrades on the utility side in order to bring in the power. So we look at phased in approaches, in order to be able to achieve that mission. So it is something where we do look at on a case by case scenario. And as we're going through the process, these are things that we do keep the customer in line and letting them know like what our timeline might look like, right? So we always do disclose a year to year and a half for infrastructure deployment, but depending on the site specific, right, that could go more, right? That could be one of the major barriers are those upgrades on the utility side. So it's something that we definitely have to be cognizant of going into it. So usually what we'll do, like on the front end before they even apply, is we'll go into our Dr. Pep tool, we'll look at different layers, we'll look at the local grid needs assessment and kind of give it an estimate. And at that point, kind of give them an idea, right? If I'm seeing there's only like 0.8 megawatts and it's like this massive project, then their conversation shifts really, really fast. And I'd bring some project engineers into the call, so subject matter experts, to be able to address those particular concerns before they're even in our program. So that's always available to our customers as they're transitioning into, electric.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to add, I think Romero showed the Dr. Pep tool, and that's a very useful tool. It is a public tool. It's available to everyone. So, and I think all 3 IOUs in California have it. So if you are based in California, you can just plug in your address on PG&E or San Diego's Distributed Energy Resources external portal is what the Dr. Pep is. So Romero just posted the Dr. Pep link for SE. But that's a really useful tool to see which circuit you are on, how much is available, posting capacity available on that circuit, how much solar storage, other DERs are on that circuit, what's the remaining room on it. It's a good initial screening tool, and that could help with the siting and selections if you're looking at better locations and working with the utility to really understand it in the next step.
Yeah, and just to add on, if you are up here in PG&E's service area, that's their ICA map, their interconnection capacity analysis map.
So let me go ahead. Let's switch gears a little bit. We have about half an hour, a little bit less left. Talk a bit about the grid and reliability. And I think for me, the most common thing that I hear, is, hey, the grid can never support all the demand from charging vehicles. I mean, I think sort of the most basic question that we get. Are there any sort of quick responses that you would have to that? Zach, you look like.
Yeah, I can start just to take some pressure off Ramiro. I spent 17 years in electric utilities, and at Edison, I was fortunate to both work in grid modernization as well as power generation and energy procurement, all different functions. The grid is I think the future of utilities, and this is the vision a lot of electric utilities are headed, is really to provide a plug-and-play platform which empowers customers, whether it's load for demand or EV charging, or it's a distributed energy resource like solar or battery storage, to just plug and play and be able to connect to the grid as quickly as possible. And that requires investments in the grid. That requires investments in the distribution grid, which was not traditionally designed for two-way power flow. It was designed for just one-way power flow from large, big power plants to step-up transformers, long-distance transmission lines, step-down distribution, and flow it to the houses and buildings. Now we are putting more load on that distribution system, and more rooftop solar and storage is coming in. So better automation of operation of distribution, high-speed, low-latency communication in control systems, more visibility so that the grid can be operated through advanced distribution management systems. All of those are, I think, necessary investments for utilities to modernize the grid, and for us as customers to be partners with utilities so that they understand where the load may come up, which circuits is there higher demand from customers, which circuits there may be higher generation available if we are planning to put in solar storage and other resources. Can this be done? Oh, absolutely. Will it? I think where it falls short is when, as a customer, when we need a certain amount of capacity and we want it to show up within a month, that cannot happen. It has to go through its own reliability analysis and upgrades to understand what all needs to happen. So those are my 2 cents, but let me pass on to others.
Yeah, thank you, Viva. That was oh, go ahead, bud.
No, I see the question. People feel free to put it into the Q&A box questions, but leading right into that, we'll continue this conversation, Mira. But it says, what does that phasing look like? If I can't get everything, I'm gonna phase my trucks, and I can't do 100 today, but you can put a few in today.
Yeah, so the phase impair, so this is the way we look at it, right? Let's say in that scenario that I used earlier where a fleet's bringing in 100 trucks, chances are, right, in most scenarios, you're not receiving all 100 trucks all at once. So let's say, for example, there's that scenario and a customer wants to deploy all 100 vehicles, then we're going to look at that vehicle deployment schedule. So in that scenario, once again, it's 10 every year, going all the way until they get their 100. So let's say that's, we don't necessarily have the power available for all 100, then we would work as a utility to bring in the power phased in, right? So ultimately meeting them at that demand point every single time is essentially what we're going to do. So usually we always use a phrase where we always say where it's not a matter of if we could serve you, it's a matter of when we could serve you, right? So in this scenario, there's one thing that we always ask that customers give us their fleet plans as early as possible, because what we are is we're utilizing fleet specific plans to actually make up how we're actually modernizing and hardening the grid. I can tell you there's $5 billion worth of investments that are going into the grid annually. And we can't just get a dartboard, right? Say, oh, we think it's going to go there, right? So like if we know where the fleet's actually deploying, that's going to help us so much more and ultimately help the end user, right? That's what we're here for, is to provide these solutions, right? So it's that utility fleet engagement is key. And then the other one's going to be like the utility and dealer and OEM engagement, right? That's like a whole other conversation. We need to have we need to be like right in line after like approval of a vehicle. Yes, they're going to go electric, contact your local utility company. And that's one thing that we're trying to push, is saying, hey, what customers are you working with and how could we be of assistance in order to avoid the scenario where you get a truck and you have nowhere to charge it, right? Nobody wants that. It doesn't do anybody any good. So that would be how we would phase in the vehicles, right? It's really just knowing what that demand is going to look like and then us working together to bring the power at the appropriate time.
I think one thing I would say, hey, we can get you temporary power, right? We can get you online. Most of the utilities can do it pretty quick. It's getting in permanent solutions and upgrading substations and lines and things that can take a long time, right?
Correct.
Okay. Let me sort of ask this. When people look at the power safety power shutoffs, the PSPS events, and everybody in the state is in a little bit different situation, of course. How do you handle? Well, what do you say to fleets? Either Zach, maybe. What do you say to somebody who approaches like, hey, how can I possibly go electric if you're going to turn my power off?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, if the electricity were to go out, if the grid were to go down, gas and diesel pumps aren't going to work either. So, it's a question that has been around for a while and is not necessarily new just to transportation electrification. But, that's one of the things that we at EBCE are thinking about in terms of, what we do as a company in bringing in, solar and wind energy and different things like that. So, part of in thinking about electrifying fleets and bringing resiliency to that is, solar and deploying solar and battery energy storage systems as well. So, hopefully, mitigating the impact on the grid in that way of, when here in California, we have, excess solar on the grid during the day, deploying solar and battery energy storage at these types of facilities as well to capture that energy during the day when there's an excess, and then deploying that electricity to the vehicles at night when the sun isn't shining, right? So looking at a lot of different ways to mitigate the impact to the grid of transportation electrification. And then, also in this kind of example where, we can see where PSPS events are occurring, where there's high fire threat districts, different things like that. If your fleet is located or your domicile is located in one of those facilities, then yeah, you may be more concerned about PSPS and that question. And so what we're trying to do to help bring some more confidence and more resilience to those types of fleets too, is looking at where we can deploy, publicly accessible DC fast charging hubs, particularly for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And, maybe in areas that are less likely to have PSPS events, less likely to, not in high fire threat districts where power could get shut off. So, putting those in locations, and this is what we really need to talk to fleets and independent owner operators about and get their feedback on is where does it make sense to deploy those hubs of fast chargers that they can use when that maybe their power gets shut off at their depot facility, or in instances where we know that fleets at their domicile locations just don't have the physical space, or maybe the grid is too impacted where their fleet is to deploy all of the charging infrastructure at that site that they would need to fully support their fleet. Are they going to have to rely on fast charging along their routes or in different locations where they're stopping on their daily use cases? So trying to figure out where does it make sense to deploy those fast chargers just to bring some more resiliency to the fleets that are trying to electrify.
Yeah, I was going to add quickly that I think for Prologis buildings, this is where we see this. We have to play on both sides of equations. Both as serving the needs of our customers, partnership with utilities for the energy demand, but also deploying and providing as much of that as possible locally through solar energy. So we have over 400 megawatts of on-site rooftop solar now at our buildings, and declared a public commitment to deploy a gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts by 2025. We pair a lot of that solar with storage to shape the output of the solar when it's most needed, and offer resiliency as a service to the customers as a power backup solution as needed for the buildings. I think the idea of charging hubs in non-high fire threat districts where PSPS probability is low is also another one where there should be charging infrastructure available as a backup option. So those are some of the thoughts. Thanks.
So can I ask you, Victor, who pays for that? I mean, if you're a fleet operator or a truck driver, you're not going to be real familiar with a microgrid or a distributed energy resource. You're certainly not going to know what a utility ADMS or DERM system is, right? Which I won't define because they don't need to know it. What does the end user really see? Do they get a bill? You just put the solar in and you put the battery in, and they're just going to get a set price per kilowatt hour, something like that.
Yeah, the end user gets basically energy as a service, and which is dollar per kilowatt hour. That's all what they see. They don't have to get into any long-term commitment beyond the termination of their lease, whatever that lease is for. And if they require a certain level of resiliency beyond the energy as a service, then that's an add-on service for resiliency as a service for every kilowatt hour that comes with a certain amount of backup power. So the idea is to really simplify, because the customers in our buildings, to your point, they don't want to think about their energy resiliency and power shutoffs, and they don't have time to be experts, energy experts, or certainly not technical experts on designing electric grid or operating it or understanding risks of all these different scenarios. And this is why I think we see as with our scale and with the level of service that our customers expect, we have built a team of experts to deploy these solutions and simplify as much as possible for them.
I know I've read. I know the PUC, California Public Utilities Commission, which ultimately oversees most of California's electric utilities. I mean, they've made it very clear, put up mitigation measures for these outages, and that's being worked on as brainstorming. But it could be a trailer full of batteries, right? Usually there's some advance notice. We're going to have hot, dry conditions with wind. We know that's going to happen September, October, and they know where it's going to happen. They bring their trailer full of batteries, or you have your trucks and this is coming, so maybe you make sure everything is fully charged ahead of time when otherwise your demand management system might not keep everything charged. So there's definitely I think a lot of mitigation measures that we're seeing, and And ultimately, a lot of money is being spent on grid hardening, right? And undergrounding the lines, putting in fuses that when they burn out, the sparks don't fall on the ground, a lot of simple things, reclosers, if a line is triggered, it stays open until somebody goes and looks at it. So hopefully, I think these PSPS events will start to slow down and put around. And even if you look at the data from when they first started several years ago, there's a lot fewer per year. So I think we covered that. We talked a little bit about solar and storage. Let me ask a little bit about timing. How are we doing on time? We have enough time. We've been hearing sort of a year to year and a half. But it sounds like the first thing you really should do is call a utility and talk to them. I mean, is that sort of I think a good sort of first piece of advice?
Absolutely. I think that's very, very, very important, right? To kind of uncover what the elephant in the room is, right? For your particular scenario as soon as possible. And also, right, to see like what kind of grant programs or, EV infrastructure installation programs, such as what we offer, might be available to a customer, to help them offset the cost of transitioning to electric. So having that early utility engagement will do a couple things, right? It's going to first help them get a plan, right? Get an infrastructure installation framework, if you will, but then also determine like what kind of programs and availabilities of different such things like what we have on the chargeable transport side are available to the customer, so that as they are transitioning, they have resources now available to them.
And you said that's the magic 4-letter word, right? Free.
Correct. Free.
Yeah. I know I've taken the CARB diesel hotline for a lot of years, been to a lot of conferences. Free is the magic word. These guys can call up, go to the website, check out the contact information, and get it. Generally, for most utilities, get a free initial assessment, and wrap your head around it, because it is you're hearing about these. You hear all these fancy terms today, and some of you you're not going to know, and it's like you're like, oh, I don't have time to get into this process. I'm trying to get my load delivered today,
Exactly.
But if there's help out there for people to access. I think that's really important for folks to know. In terms of that process, it's sort of like getting into the process. What are some of the barriers that we see and you touched upon them, Ramiro, somewhat in your presentation, but maybe the other side input too. What are those barriers you're seeing, the roadblocks that are giving them a hiccup? So instead of a year and a half, it could take them 9 to 12 months or less.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on that a little bit as well. And like just in some of our projects at EBCE, where we're trying to deploy DC fast chargers, we run into some of those barriers as well. And some of those include, just the placement of the equipment that's needed to support the charging infrastructure, right? If you need to bring in a new transformer and the switch gear and all of that, and just a lack of physical space is a real issue sometimes in certain locations, and can often be the case at fleet depots where space is already utilized to a maximum extent. Doesn't necessarily give you that flexibility of bringing in charging infrastructure and the to the meter infrastructure that's needed to support that. So that's something that we've seen and something that we've heard from fleets that we've offered this technical assistance program to, where we've had the consultant team go in and look at their domicile locations, and it's determined that they just can't really fit the infrastructure. So some things that we've done to work around that are bringing in like mobile chargers, but then also assessing what the feasibility is of that fleet to actually charge on their routes or at the locations that they're stopping at. So again, utilizing fast chargers to the extent possible there. So that's definitely a barrier that we've seen. And then, the timing can just get really thrown off when you have a barrier like that, in terms of, just getting that kind of across that first major milestone of figuring out where to place the infrastructure. So that can definitely add a lot of time to the process. So to the extent that you can work with your utility up front to, figure out if there is going to be that barrier, and start to think about solutions to that ahead of, actually submitting an application to get an assessment done and things like that, could help expedite that process, I think.
Does a fleet need to hire an engineering firm or a consultant? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Or can they do this on their own, or the resources available for success?
I think that really depends on the intensity of the fleet deployment itself, right? And I think like that's one of the issues that I see too, is where they're a customer, right? Like, or I call customers, but a fleet, they might be getting different information from different places, and everybody tells you something a little bit different. So you really kind of have to determine what's going to be the best option for your fleet and look at your end solution, and then you want to kind of back into it, right? Now, to answer the question specifically, sometimes you have fleets of 900 assets, right? I just talked to a city yesterday, and they have literally over 900 assets of different asset classes trying to electrify. They had no idea where to start, multiple site facilities. I see a great value in bringing a consultant to that area, something of that nature, as opposed to, for example, a fleet operator who's got 5 trucks. They're going to phase them in over 3 or 4 years. They know they need to go to comply with regulations. It's a little bit easier, right? Those are some things that we can walk them through that process, just through simple questions. So one thing that we do on the initial intake is really doing a deep dive into a customer's operation. I know I give you guys literally like a 15-minute version of what's normally an hour-long phone call that's really, really interactive. And by the end of it, really the goal is to say, okay, based on the scenario that you told us and based on the program, here's where you should start, whether it's EV rent a study or grant writing or CR or any of the program, right? And then kind of pushing them down that path of electrification as to what we feel is the best for them. And sometimes, it's so intricate where, like the scenario of the 900 assets, right? That's going to be something where that would be a value because the customer might not be making the right decisions. And those are things that as utility, we wouldn't be able to help them make that decision.
Vipul, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, if this is the first project for a fleet owner or operator, it's good to not go through the learning curve yourself and engage with someone who has done this, whether that's an engineering firm or I'll promote here Prologis mobility team again. I think they do a fabulous job very quickly as soon as they engage with the customer, whether it's in our building or not, to help them understand what the opportunity or what the project could be and how to work with the local utility, how to plan for it, and what could be some of the roadblocks to get ahead of them. But if it's something that's the fleet owner or operator have done it at a few locations and they have established their process, it becomes easier after a while. Thanks.
Perfect. Let me ask, we heard a little bit in the infrastructure session about permitting and that sort of process. And I know there's definitely time when you look at those, that part of the Charge Ready presentation had permitting in there. Any sort of commentary? What is an authority having jurisdiction? How can those be a roadblock, and how can you avoid slowdowns out of permitting department?
I can take an initial stab at that. An authority having jurisdiction is typically, the local government jurisdiction that your domicile location is within, so either the city or the county. In terms of permitting and going through those agencies, there are a couple of regulations in place that in California that have helped expedite the permitting processes for those permitting agencies and the AHJs. So AB 1236 and AB 970 are the two kind of main ones there that are really put in place and are meant to expedite the permitting process for installing EV charging stations. So, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GoBiz, has a great website and resources around that, where you can actually look at a map and see if the jurisdiction that you're within is in fact streamlined and up to date and streamlined with AB 1236 and 970. And basically what that does is it kind of limits the timelines that those permitting agencies have in order to process an application and respond to a permit application. And it also requires them to write ordinances that streamline that process as well. And post permitting checklists, basically, that are kind of the step-by-step things that you need to do in order to get permitted and streamlined. And it limits the amount of review that gets done. It limits that to basically just health and safety checks. So again, you can go to GoBiz. Their website on that is a great resource. It'll show you if your jurisdiction is streamlined or not. And then from there, you can link out to what the process is for going through that permitting process with your permitting agency in AHJ.
Perfect. Again, you guys are getting low on time. Any sort of, hey, what are the most common things the building department is going to throw back? Any quick thoughts? No? Okay. One of the things I wanted to point out in terms of timing, and we heard about this in the other session, the CPUC has a proposal out to require electrification. I believe it was 125 business days we heard earlier. So there's definitely work on speeding up some of the timeframes for this. Any kind of rural considerations? We talked, the PSPS events definitely impact rural areas, although certain urban areas. Are these programs available for the more rural areas of the state? And we had some questions earlier from folks up in the Eureka, Mendocino areas as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brenda, that's a little out of my area of expertise.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe add a couple thoughts there. I think the IOU programs are available across the IOU service territory. That includes urban and rural areas. And I think the IOUs here, so SE or PG&E or East Bay, I think they are, over 50,000 square mile territory for SE, a little bit larger for PG&E, and touches central California rural areas as well as suburban areas. So for our business model, I think when we look at the transportation routes, there is a typical drayage application, which is moving goods from Port of Long Beach or Port of Oakland or Houston to within a fixed distance, typically less than 100 miles warehouse that goes through a defined route. Then there's long distance transportation and there's last mile delivery. And within that long distance transportation use case, the concept of charging hubs and providing that along the highways, I think that's where you'll see more projects which may not be in a dense urban center simply because land will be cheaper and hopefully power is accessible in some of those rural areas. But that's I think that'll be part of the future solution, and where these programs have to reach out to enable hubs so that the electrification can work for cross-country goods transportation.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then I'm sort of going rapid fire, because we'll turn it back over to Bruce in another couple minutes. One last thing, we had a question about grants and wanted to ask a little bit, how do these utility programs typically interact with other infrastructure programs that are out there? The main one right now is called Energize, but there's also Cal EVIP 2.0 that's supposed to open in the next month or two, which is potentially another several $100 million per year.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I can tell you, we have a great relationship with CalSTAR. I talk to those folks at CalSTAR on a weekly basis, and definitely do sync up with their Energize program and how that works with our Charge Ready Transfer program. So yes, we're definitely in the know. We do disclose and give customer information in regards to all the available grants that are out there, including the CalSTAR Energize program. So it's something that is stackable with our programs, which is great. So that makes it a little bit easier. And then, of course, we do give customers access to our grant writing assistance services, which would be the Carl Moyer program currently, and the Volkswagen mitigation program. Both those requiring a scrap. So that would be something. And if somebody wanted to embark on the HVIP route, then we refer them back to their approved dealer that is able to assist them with the HVIP program.
And I know, I'll let you speak in a second, Zach. Our website, the CARB truck stop website that Bruce talked about earlier, we have a pretty good list of most of the major incentive programs running at the moment, because some open and close, some are open all the time. You definitely want to take a peek at that. We covered grants incentives, I believe, on day one of the next stop events, which is why we're not going into any detail today about it. But Zach, go ahead.
You actually hit exactly what I was going to say and refer people to. So
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to touch on, we probably should, you talked about a little bit in the initial presentation from Miro, but anybody can speak about it. Will people spike their electric bill? What do fleets need to do to control costs? And things sort of like a little bit about demand response and just what fleets need to be aware of so they don't get any surprises at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the major things is, as you are transitioning to electric, is definitely talk to the local utility and establish a rate structure, right? So there's so many different tariffs out there. And I can tell you, if you just hook it up to your regular building load, you're going to be unpleasantly surprised. So that's something where having that interaction, even at that level, right, is very, very important. And then also, like, if you do that, right, if you are hooking up to your current EV load, building load, and you might be okay for that first initial deployment, but what's going to happen like the second or third or maybe fourth deployment? At some point, you're going to grow out of it. And then not to mention possibly popping breakers and causing other issues that you don't want. But yes, your demand charges are something that you have to be privy to, and also the rate structure itself, because that just means that your bill's going to skyrocket, and it could have been avoided potentially had you called the local utility and set up yourself up on a better rate structure.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit too, here at least in PG&E's service area, there's the business EV rate, the BEV rate. So that's one mechanism for kind of keeping your costs down. Having some sort of charge management system in place, or a load management system in place for your chargers that smart charging, as they call it. That'll charge your vehicles at the right time depending on the rate. So you can set that software up.
Yeah, I was just going to add, so managed charging is part of the solution. Understanding the right utility tariff is part of the solution. There's hundreds of utility tariffs that, unless you've worked within a utility or you've tried to understand them all, it's not a very, not your typical Friday evening reading material to go through. But also deployment of storage on that meter to even out some of those demand charges and use the energy arbitrage from off peak to on peak. That will help the grid, that will help the utility, that will help the electric bills as well. Perfect.
Thank you all for that. So I think that's about all we have time for. We'll let Bruce give a chat and wrap it up. I know I feel like we did a pretty good job of going through some of these issues. We could probably go for another hour. But thank you so much for being here. I mean, I think for me, the takeaways, talk to the utility as early as possible, even if you're not sure, let them know that you exist. Check their websites for incentives that are out there as well. And I know that billions of dollars a year of grid investments are being put in, and we feel pretty solid that the power is going to be there. You need to, it's going to take some time to get it to you, but the money's going into the grid to make sure power's online. And so with that, thank you. And we'll let Bruce wrap up the day.